Bhagavad Gita, Sankhya, chapter 2, verse 12. न त्वेवाहं जात नासं न त्वं नेमे चनाधिपाः न चैव न भविष्यामः सर्वे वयमतः परम्. It is not as if there was a point in time when I did not exist, or you did not exist, or these people around here, the warriors and kings, they did not exist. We have always been here. We have always existed. Nor would there ever be a point in future when we would cease to exist. Arjun is grieving. Krishna had just gently admonished him in the preceding verse. He said, "You are grieving for those who do not deserve to be mourned for. And yet you are speaking as wise men do." The fact is that wisdom lies in grieving neither for the living nor for the dead. We have sparse attendance today, but for the session to gain depth, I'll require correspondence from you. So be with me. Why don't you place yourself at a point where I can have some? Is difficult for me to speak just to the cameras. I require some living feedback. Right. So in the preceding verse, we said that Krishna, keeping in mind Arjun's delicate emotional situation, just very gently chided him. And he said, "What is it, this Arjun? What is this vacillation, this mental infirmity and immaturity? How come you are mourning for these people? They do not deserve your grief, right? And yet you are confident that your actions are born out of wisdom. The fact is, wisdom lies in grieving neither for the living nor for the dead." Now, there was a beautiful statement, and we deliberated over it for a couple of hours. But there was one end left loose there, which was that probably Sri Krishna is expounding himself on the matter of merit. That he is telling Arjun that there are some people who indeed deserve to be mourned for, and then there are some you need not grieve for. It might appear to a newcomer that Sri Krishna is saying that there is a class of people who deserve your sadness, your grief towards them, and then there is another class of people you should not feel sorry for. As if Sri Krishna has read our minds. In the very next verse, he clarifies. He says, it is not as if the Kaurav side does not merit your sympathy and the Pandav side does. No. There is just nobody who is so important that he deserves your sadness, your happiness, your consideration, as if he is significant. What is that? What is Krishna trying to say? Is all this an instruction in brutality? A teaching towards insensitivity? A facilitation of cold-blooded murder? Nobody deserves your feeling, your sensitivity, your sympathy, your compassion. The wise one, grieve neither for the living nor for the dead. Let there be no grief. Do as you please. Is this what Krishna is trying to say? If you quote selectively, this is what you may succeed in proving. And people have done that. If you just pick up verse 11, you can prove whatever your intent pushes you to. But if you really want to understand why Krishna is advising Arjun not to grieve, you will have to pay attention to the verse we have taken up today. Right? What is Sri Krishna saying tonight? He's saying, you have always existed, I have always existed, these kings have always existed, and they will continue to exist in the, come on please, future. Which simply means that they are not, if I have existed and I continue to exist in the future, then I am not dying. I'm not dying at any point. I'm not dying at any point. So, not dying at any point, what does Krishna mean by that? Is he saying that the beings over there are immortal? That they are the ultimate Atma itself? They have always been there. Today, at this moment, they are there in front of your eyes. And Sri Krishna avers that they will continue to be there in the future as well. That sounds a bit like Atma, because we have had the tradition of saying that Atma is Amar, right? So these beings have been there, they are there, they will continue to be there. Is Krishna telling Arjun that all the people around them are immortal? No, something far more significant, far deeper, far more shocking, and far more difficult to accept. Are you ready to take the real import of what Sri Krishna means? Sri Krishna is saying nobody exists. How can you kill them? He's not saying they're immortal. He's saying they don't exist at all. You are looking at them as existent. You are believing in the particularity and specificity of their existence, which we call as individuality. You are believing that as individuals they exist, which means you are believing in the individual I. No, it is not there. Go and probe Arjun and check for yourself. Where is the I? You will find flesh and bones. You will find soil and dirt. Show me where is the I. The fact is, when you grieve for them, you grieve for their I. Right? You grieve for their I because you want to believe that their I exists. You know, Arjun, why you want to believe their I exists? Because you have a tremendous stake in believing that your I exists. If it is shown for good that they do not exist as individuals, it is then concurrently demonstrated that even you do not exist as an individual. And that's what your non-existent ego is so afraid of. You are not grieving for them, Arjun, then you are grieving for yourself. You are grieving for the loss of their self. The self that does not exist at all. But your problem is that if you accept that the self, the little self, the ego that is, that does not exist at all, you will have to also immediately, spontaneously, as a corollary, accept that even you don't exist at all. And that's the reason you are trying to pretend wise. You're not wise. Anybody who thinks that he exists is not wise. Who is a wise man? Who knows that he does not exist? Who are all these people then? Atop the chariots and the horses and the elephants and whatever else there is, the foot soldiers and others. Who are all these people? They are just Prakriti. They are the clouds and the rivers. They are the atoms and the molecules. They are the trees and the plants. The one atop the chariot is no different from the one on the chariot. The chariot and the charioteer are the same. The horse, the chariot, and the charioteer are just the same. But among these three, one you take as unconscious, one you take as just mildly conscious, and one you take as largely conscious. What Sri Krishna is saying is, consciousness itself is dead. In this verse, Sri Krishna has put consciousness itself to sword. Who says that Krishna had vowed to not pick up weapons on the field? Even without picking up weapons, he has just slaughtered the entire consciousness of mankind. If you can understand this verse is a death sentence to all who have ever existed, to all who exist, and to all who would ever exist. Sri Krishna, in one masterly swoop, has pronounced all of them as non-existent. You do not exist. People think Sri Krishna is telling Arjun, well, the Atma is not going to die, so you can slaughter these people and that does not matter. That comes way later. Because Arjun is anyway not concerned that he is killing the Atman. He is concerned that he is killing the individual. And Krishna is telling the individual does not exist. There is nobody who has taken birth. It is just a random aggregation of stuff. Atoms, molecules have come together and formed this system that you are calling as living. There is nothing living in it. This is just a conditioned machine. So I said the chariot is the charioteer. The weapon is the fighter. One weapon is carrying another weapon in his hand. And it is being proclaimed that one of them is conscious. No, none of them is conscious. All are behaving as per their Prakriti. And in Prakriti, there is really no death. There is just transformation. And we'll come to the issue of transformation in the next verse. I do not know whether in this session or in the next session. But what Krishna is saying is, son, we will come to the Atman later. That we will understand way later, whether it is in the stream of time, whether it is ever born, whether it ever dies. First of all, let's talk about the ego, because the ego's primary concern is itself, not the Atma. Is the ego concerned about the Atma? No, the ego is concerned about its own welfare. And Sri Krishna has told the ego, you do not need to worry about your welfare because you anyway do not exist. Who are you? The one who does not exist. So they have always been there. How? Has the sun not always been there? Has time not always been there? And by sun, I mean celestial bodies. If not this sun, then some other sun. If not this piece of rock, then other pieces of rocks and gases. Have they not always existed? Just as they have always existed since the beginning of time. Similarly, these kings and fighters and animals and stuff, they have always existed. So is there no difference then between me and the rock? No. That's a very, very important thing that Bhagavad Gita says. A very unique message from Vedanta. Life that is just Prakritic is not life at all. Life is when you are free of the Prakritic life. Therefore, the emphasis in Vedanta is not on Jivan but on Jivan Mukti. Please understand. Vedanta gives two hoots to your Jivan, which is life. And the entire emphasis is on Jivan Mukti rather. Put an end to this life. Because it is not life at all. So when you are Jivan Mukt, then life begins. When you are not Jivan Mukt, still you think that you are Jivit, that you are a Jiva. You do not exist. But you keep harboring the grand illusion with vanity that I am existent. I am, that's the ego. That thinks that it is, but is not. You are not. Arjun, you are afraid of killing them, and I am scratching my head wondering whether they... How can you kill them when they are not alive in the first place? How can you kill them when they are not alive in the first place? This is the import of this verse. They have always been there. They have always been there even when the first man was not there. Let's take for a moment the Big Bang as the beginning. They were there even in the moment of the Big Bang. They were there. Even when consciousness, as you know it today, was not even in its primordial form, the kings were still there. Why is Krishna saying so? How can he say that the kings were there? Because the stones were there. Because the stones were there, the atoms were there. The atoms are the kings are the atoms. Now, what do you mean? What is the difference between the living and the dead then? There is no difference. There is just no difference. No, but something must be happening, you know. When a man dies, something changes, so there has to be a difference between the living and the dead. No, sir. Sodium and hydrochloric acid. And you have some salt. Where has the sodium gone? Where has the sodium gone? Nowhere. It has become something else in a very material way. That's what death is. These are all atoms that are together at this moment assembled in one particular configuration. What is death then? The breakdown of that configuration. Full stop, nothing else. So there is really nothing called the Jivatma then. And at most the Jivatma is an assembly, a configuration, a design, a pattern. What happens at the moment of death then? Nothing. The molecules that were together here, they go back to the earth and to the air, to the clouds, to the waters. They've gone back. And they will again come together in a different configuration to become something else. Now this coming together and dispersing again, how can you call this as life? This is no life. This is just Prakritic assembly and disassembly. You know of those games in which there are little blocks. What do you call them? Logo? What? Lego. So kids put together those blocks and something emerges out of that. And then the kid gets fed up of it. And what does he do? He again breaks the assembly and puts it apart. That's what life and death are. And the pieces that have now come apart will again come together in some other form. So the little sheet or instruction manual that you get along with the package of the game, what does that contain? Configurations. Some 20 or 30 configurations to exemplify how the game can be played. Just that when it comes to Lego, maybe 20 or 40 different kinds of designs are possible. And when it comes to Prakriti, a far greater number is possible. You can call that infinite. 84 lakh. That's just the game of configuration. Little these things are atoms, and they come together and they make one thing. And then you put that thing on fire and all the atoms, they just disperse. There is no death there. There will be another day. They will again combine, and that recombination will result in another one that you will call as an organism, that you will call as living. It's very difficult to understand. It's not at all difficult to understand. Because it's a very obvious thing, yet it's very difficult to understand. It's difficult to understand because if you accept this about that game of the kids, you will have to accept the same thing about yourself. You will have to call yourself as dead. The ego does not want to do that. Why is the ego so scared of calling itself dead? Because it is dead. And those, very funnily, who have come alive, take pleasure in calling themselves as dead. Mohe marana ka chao. This is a man truly alive. Those who come truly alive, they rejoice in declaring themselves dead, gone, finished. Gate gate paragate swaha. I'm gone. My name is Tathagat. I'm gone. This is the mark of someone who is at least on the edge of Prakriti, either gone or about to leap over. Only he can relish these words. Others shiver at the sound. They cannot tolerate the Gita. They cannot tolerate the hollowness, the very obvious shallowness of their non-existence. So they keep calling themselves as, oh, I am alive, oh, I am alive. And Krishna looks at these people and says, how are you alive? You are doing just what atoms and molecules do. How do they behave? As per their Prakritic disposition. They can do nothing more, nothing less than that. How will a sodium atom behave in company of H2O? It will go berserk. It will say, I have found my mate. And they come together and there is a lot of energy on display. Seen these two come together, sodium and water? Seen the terrific release of energy? As if both had a great internal tension because of separation. And tension means energy, right? Sodium was tense. Oh, I'm not getting my mate. And so was water. Where is sodium? There is so much stress. The moment these two touch each other, what do you find? A great explosion of energy. And these two have attained a little bit of relaxation. They settle down because the energy is now out. The energy is out. So they can now settle down. They come into a state of relatively more stable equilibrium. Do you not behave the same way? Look at what you do in company of money or prestige or power or the opposite gender. Heard the bang, experienced the explosion, seen the fires, seen how you change in the presence of just stuff. Just stuff. There was this master. One day, as he sat to lecture, he kept a pile of gold biscuits by his side, probably on the table itself, here. So here's the master. And here are the biscuits. And it was his custom to begin only when he sensed that the audience was at peace, stable, meditative, ready to receive. That day he sat for an hour and didn't speak a word. Because his rule was to begin speaking only when the audience was well settled, meditative, not disturbed, a bit centered and receptive. That day he sat for an hour, just kept looking at it at his audience and didn't even begin to speak. And then after an hour he said, this was the lecture. This was the lecture. We are atoms. Today you reacted with gold. Today you reacted with gold. And since you are busy reacting, how do I speak? There is nobody to speak to. That's non-existence. There is nobody to speak to. And this was a demonstration of your non-existence. If I am to speak to you, there has to be a you to speak to. There is nobody out there I can speak to. You are just atoms. Today you were all the time busy reacting with the gold molecule. This is the lesson. Arjun, there is nobody here in sight who is not just molecules and chemicals and polymers. Maybe a mixture of stuff, like organic fluids containing complex molecules. Mixtures of complex compounds, at most. But that does not make the mixture alive. Yes, obviously, these are not simple molecules. Sodium chloride is a simple inorganic molecule. There can be complex and huge organic polymers. Huge. And then you can take a lot of them and create some kind of an organic soup from there. But is that any different from, fundamentally different from a simple molecule like H2O? No. It might be a huge mixture, a huge organized mixture, yet it is not sentient. It is not conscious. That which you call as your consciousness is false consciousness. These are two words, one from Marx and one from Sartre. Bad faith and false consciousness. Bad faith and false consciousness. And both mean almost the same thing. A belief in that which does not exist. False consciousness. You're believing in something that first of all has no existence. But the believer continues to believe because first of all he wants to prove that he exists. You and I are birds of the same feather. If I prove that you are not a bird, then I too am not a bird. So I'll defend you with all my might, not because I love you, but because my own thing is at stake. So if Arjun does not want to fight them, is it because he loves them? No. It is because if he kills them, it will be proven that even Arjun was not existent. So Arjun does not want to kill the non-existent. And people accuse Krishna of violence. How is it violence to kill those who do not exist? Please tell me. Even if we go by the normal, popular, pedestrian definition of violence, what's that definition? Violence is to hurt the other. Even if we accept that definition, though it's a very pedestrian definition, even if we accept that definition, how can it be violence to kill the one who anyway does not exist? You never were. You never were. You are an algorithm. If I am to use a subtler representation, molecules appear a bit gross, right? Either I could say you are an assembly of molecules, or I could say that you are just a design, a pattern, or an algorithm. How is it violence to delete a computer program? How is it? Huh? Rohit has been thinking so hard whether he should uninstall a few apps or not. Because that would mean that he has killed those apps. Now, how is this funny? How is this funny? If it is funny only for someone who is truly alive, like a Krishna. He can find this funny. Because he knows that people are like apps. Think of all the people to whom you matter in some way or other. Are you not like an app to them? An app that performs a specific function. You are apps to people. You are uninstalled and you will be uninstalled. And that's all right. And that's all right because that's what apps are for. So that's okay. But the thing becomes a bit comical when somebody starts weeping. How do I uninstall this app? That's violence. For me to grieve over you, first of all, you must exist. Else it's like grieving over somebody who died in your sleep. And you all must have had nightmares in which somebody close, somebody loved, indeed does die or faces harm. Have you not had those dreams? And in the dream, there is a lot of vexation. You actually experience the pain of bereavement. What happens the moment you get up? All that is gone. Because there was no death in the first place. There was no death in the first place because the fellow is still alive. Because the fellow is still alive. Because the fellow was never alive. You need not grieve, not because the fellow is still alive, but because the fellow was never alive. Why are you grieving, Arjun? These chaps in front of you, they never bothered to come alive. When they were never born at all, how can you kill them? Not one of them has bothered to come alive. Life is an opportunity, just a chance, not a guarantee. Life is an opportunity to come alive. And I assure you, Arjun, none of these people here have taken that opportunity. They all have wasted the occasion called life. None of them has even been born. How can you kill them? And they have always existed, just as sand and dust have always existed. When you will kill them, they will still exist. Because even before their so-called death, they were just bodies. And even after their death, the body will continue. The body will continue in the form of ash, in the form of smoke, in the form of vapor, and in the form of the fine dust that will then... Are you getting it? So Arjun, where is the point of grief? Show me where is the killing. There is no killing. If something is being killed, it is your illusion that somebody is alive. We are not going to kill people. We are going to kill your illusion that people are. There is nobody here. They will continue to exist in future. How? Because the body is immortal. Oh, what's that? What's that? Sir, what did you just say? Come on, is that a Vedanti speaking? Yes. Yes. The body is immortal. There is a difference between timelessness and immortality. Note this down. Prakriti is immortal, Atma is timeless. Prakriti is immortal, Atma is timeless. What is it that then begins and ends in time? That's called the illusion that has the name of the ego. Prakriti is immortal, Atma is timeless. The ego begins in time and ends in time. Prakriti is the unending stream. You cannot locate its beginning. You cannot spot its end. That's Prakriti, immortal. In the stream, there are things that rise and fall. They have a beginning and they have an end. That's called ego. And then there is that's outside the stream. That's called Atma. So the body is immortal. The body is, what is it that dies then? But the ego was never born. So the knowers have said, death is an illusion. Only that which was never born succeeds in dying. Only that which was never born succeeds in dying. The body is immortal. How is the body immortal? Come on, show me. Kill the molecule over here. Kill it. You cannot. Kill this molecule. Anybody wants to try? Try killing a molecule. Can you? You can at the most disintegrate it. You can split the atom. Right? You can attack the nucleus. You can even manage some kind of radioactive mutation. Oxygen can change to nitrogen. That much you can succeed in doing. But how will you kill the fundamental unit of Prakriti? How will you kill it? It is immortal. You cannot kill it. You get it? That's why you used to call for a very long time the atom as indivisible. Indivisible. You also used to think that it is indestructible. Later on, physics showed that it can be destroyed. But still, matter itself cannot be destroyed. It can at most be turned into energy. You have now come upon mass energy equivalence, which is not destruction. So the atom is immortal. Don't call it the atom, call it an electron. Don't call it an electron, call it a string or a quark or whatever. But whatsoever is the fundamental unit, that is immortal. At most it can change its form. From matter it can turn to energy, or you can come upon its dual nature. You can say, oh, it's matter and energy, sometimes matter, sometimes energy. But you cannot say it is gone. So Prakriti is immortal. You read the verse again. Now you'll understand what Krishna is saying. I have always existed, so have you, so have these kings. And there shall never be a time in the future when we shall not exist. Now replace you, I, and kings with atom or Prakriti. That's what Krishna is saying here. You, I, and these kings, they are all Prakriti. So what are you weeping over? We are all just Prakriti. You're all just Prakriti. The game will continue. Sorrow is needless, just as ego is needless. There exists no vacancy for the ego. There is nobody who ever extended an invitation to the ego. It comes unsolicited. It just sits where there is no need for it to exist. The daily business of the world can continue beautifully even without the ego, but the ego exists. Absolutely needlessly. And the only output is that it gives pain to itself. That's all the ego succeeds in doing by its needless presence. It comes needlessly, it pains itself needlessly. Are you getting it? Are you seeing? Are you sniffing? There's a principle coming up. What is the definition of the non-existent? What is it that does not have an existence truly? In the spiritual sense, that which does not have a use. Ask yourself, is this really useful? If it is useful, then it can be called as existent. Otherwise, its removal cannot be called as death. If it does not have a use, its removal cannot be called as a loss. Death is loss, right? If it does not have a use, its removal cannot be called as a loss. It's a question that often arises in philosophy. What are the characteristics of truth? So very cleanly and classically speaking, it is said truth can have no characteristics. But those who have tried to make the answer a bit more practical have said that the greatest characteristic of the truth is that it is useful. If it does not help you, it is not the truth. If it is merely a complex articulation of a principle, it cannot be called as a truth. It has to be useful. And that's the reason the truth has been worshipped. In many foolish ways. Fine, I understand. In many foolish ways, in many forms and names, the truth has been worshipped. It has been worshipped just because it is useful. The ego is not the truth. The ego is not useful. Remove the ego and show me who loses. Remove the ego and show me who has been hurt or belittled. The one who feels hurt and belittled is itself called the ego. Take ego out of all Prakritic equations and you find that the equations stand balanced. What is it that makes the equations in Prakriti imbalanced? Ego. If you find something imbalanced somewhere, there must be ego either on both sides or at least on one of the sides. You remember balancing of equations in chemistry? Right? You used to balance, you know, these three things combine to produce those two things. Yet they have to be balanced, because if there are 7 carbon atoms on this side, there must be 7 on this side also. Matter cannot be lost, so you use to balance them. Did you require the ego to balance them? And if there is something called I on either side, and by I do not mean iodine, I mean ego. If there is an I, a small I, nice, in mathematics, a small I denotes an imaginary number, so that's the ego. An imaginary quantity. So there is an I on both sides or either side. It will be impossible to equate or balance. The Upanishads, very beautifully and very mystically put it. They say Brahma or Atma is the balancing tail of the universe. What is it that they mean by that? What they mean is that removal of ego is what balances everything. Brahm is nothing but the absence of ego. Brahm by itself is no particular object. Are you getting it? If you find things in your life do not add up, it certainly indicates the presence of a small I. If there is something that stands disturbed or imbalanced, stuff is not fitting in, something is extra or something is amiss, immediately indicates the presence of. Remove the I, and Prakriti knows how to conduct its business very, very smoothly. That itself is called Sahajata. Sahajata. Sahajata is life without ego. There is really no word for Sahajata in non-Indian languages. Approximately, they called it spontaneity. But spontaneity is not really Sahajta. Sahaj they also call as uncaused or spontaneous. But Sahaj has a ring to it that none of its counterparts have. Sahaj, balanced, egoless. The ego is that which does not exist yet barges in. Is it? We cannot say. Is it not? We cannot say. What we know is that it need not be. If you say it exists, that's not true. And if you insist it does not exist, that's vanity. Well, look at your life. Just ego and more of ego. And still you say ego does not exist. It does not behove you to say that. So we do not know whether the ego really exists. For sure, when we pay attention to life, we find there is nothing called. Had there been something called ego, we wouldn't have managed to be attentive. Can there be attention in ego? So the very presence of attention proves that the ego does not exist. If the ego were really to exist, nobody would have managed to be attentive even for a second. Equally, you are not always attentive. So the ego is there. When you are not attentive, the ego is there. Inattention, when you want to find out ego, there is no ego to observe. So we cannot say it is, we cannot say it is not, but we can surely say it need not be. It is needless, it is useless. It is needless, it is useless. Why then must this war be fought? Because the ego need not be. To remove that which need not exist. Somebody has broken into the party. Some rowdy gatecrasher. The war is about bouncers throwing him out. What do you do if somebody barges into your room? What do? You push him out. That's what the Mahabharata war is all about. You're not killing people because people cannot be killed. You're putting an end to that which should anyway never have existed or begun. Are you getting it? If ego exists, it is just like a brick. It is not sentient. Had it been sentient, it wouldn't have existed. If you break a brick, if you shatter it into pieces, is that murder? No. But remember that this brick called the ego is capable of great nuisance. It is infectious. You might be a quiet person, but in the presence of an egoistic person, you might find that your own ego starts raising its head. Just as we talk of the becoming effect of the wise men, similarly, there is the disturbing or arousing effect of the egoistic man. Have you not experienced that? You're quiet. And one disturbing fellow, he manages to send everybody into a tailspin. And everything was perfectly balanced. The plane was floating, and now there is a tailspin. That's what is called the war. Who will win? The forces of calmness or the agents of turbulence? These people, they do not exist, but if they are allowed to win the war, they will turn the entire subcontinent turbulent. The ego might not exist, but it suffers a lot, does it not? That's the funny thing about the ego. not even being alive. It lives a life of misery. It's like someone saying, I have been suffering because of my girlfriend since the last 10 years. It turns out he never had a girlfriend. That's the ego. You're suffering on account of something you don't even have. And there are so many stories in wisdom literature, in folklore. A fellow had to be cursed. There was something vile he might have done. So there was some wandering mendicant, some sadhu, somebody. He decided that this chap ought to be cursed. So he did some jantar mantar, and he said, I have in that particular vault kept a huge load of gold for you. A huge load of gold for you. And it will keep multiplying for you. The only condition is that you have to constantly remember it. The only condition is that you have to constantly remember it. Now, only the sadhu knows that this is indeed a curse. The fellow thinks that he is being blessed. So he says, there in that vault, so much gold has been kept, and it will not only remain but also multiply. The condition is that you must always remember it. He says, fine. How much is the lock-in period? He says 10 years. For 10 years, you have to remember it every moment. And then you can just go and retrieve it, and you will find a huge load of gold. So the fellow remembers it constantly, forgets all about anything and everything else. And constantly he's just remembering the gold. And after 10 years, he goes and opens the vault, and what does he find? Nothing. That's the ego. That's the curse called the ego. Don't you always remember it? Don't you always remember it? Please tell me. Huh? Don't you always remember it? There are two very remarkable things about this story. One, how closely it reverberates with verse number 12. And two, I just made it up. There's one more remarkable thing, that the other story that we had in the day, rather tonight, that too was a made up one. But if it's useful, we'll call it the truth. Was it not useful? Was it useful or not? Would you then call this story as my imagination? That's truth. Did it help or not? And I'm not talking of superficial help. I'm not talking of painkiller-like help. I'm talking of existential help. Has it not brought you face to face with something very important in your own existence? That's called the truth. And that's the ego. The fellow was lucky. He was let off after just 10 years. We are sentenced for life. We have to constantly remember the ego. And we think it is something very precious. And we want it to constantly multiply. The fact is that irrespective of the number you multiply 0 with, it remains 0. The ego cannot grow because it never was in the first place. But it will take away all your time. For 10 years, the fellow was ceaselessly thinking only about the gold. That's what the ego does. It kills time. It kills the opportunity that you have. It occupies your life and thereby does not allow you to come alive. Think of that man, constantly thinking that he has something valuable, constantly looking forward to the multiplication and the future. That's what the ego does, constantly looks forward to the future. Works only with the intent to multiply itself in the future. Lives constantly in an illusion. And this fellow managed to see that there is nothing. None of us managed to see that there is nothing. We spend our lives totally meaninglessly. Rather, we fill up our lives with false meanings. No, our lives are not meaningless. Was that chap's life meaningless for 10 years? No, it was not meaningless. It was very purposeful. Just that it was a false purpose. Similar are our lives, full of false purposes. False purposes. False meanings. And that deprives us of the sahaj meaning that Prakritic life has. You know, in some sense, if you are completely Prakritic, you are Mukt. That's why these two things always go hand in hand. When you are Atmastha within, you are Prakritistha outside. Now, being Atmastha really does not mean anything tangibly. So all that is tangible is the free flow of Prakriti in your body and mind. If that is there, then you are Atmastha. But you are robbed of that by a promise. The ego is a promise that is never kept. And it's a long-term promise. There always is a future. There is no expiry date. Actually, quite well said. The ego is a long-term promise that is never kept. It's like having a huge FD on auto renewal. You understand auto renewal? So there is an FD. And the day the FD matures, then along with the interest, the whole principal is again reinvested into a fresh FD. And you keep thinking that you have a huge sum, that your corpus is multiplying. The thing actually never came to your hands, never. So you invested 10 lakhs. After 2 years, 3 years, the 10 lakhs became 12. And the 12 was reinvested automatically. All you had was a promise that one day you will be able to use break the FD, retrieve the money. That day never comes. The day never comes. That's why those who try to test their FDs at some point or the other in life are the luckier ones. Either they test it or some contingency forces them to break the FD. Those are the lucky ones. Because they get a shock. When they go to the bank to retrieve their money, what do they discover? There is nothing, they never had any money. They are the lucky ones. The fact of nothingness is revealed to them. There is nothing. You just thought there is something, there is nothing. But then there are those who think they are luckier. Life never tests them. They never come upon hard times. So they just keep believing. The ego, therefore, is just a belief. Just a belief. If you test it, it comes short of your expectations. The fundamental expectation is that there is an ego. Even the fundamental expectation is not kept. Arjun, you look at those eyes, these eyes, and you are moved with emotion. You are filled with pity. You think there is something in those eyes. That something, Arjun, you call as life. Right? You say, oh, eye is full of life. But Arjun, that's a misconception. That's just a belief. There is nothing in those eyes, Arjun. Just that those eyes look very similar to your own eyes, and you want to believe that your eyes are lit with consciousness. The fact is, those eyes out there across the field are as empty as your own eyes. There is no consciousness there. There is no consciousness here. And the common consciousness that you see there is just dead duality. It is not alive. Iron pieces get attracted to a magnet piece. There is a correspondence between the two things. One thing surely perceives the other thing. Do you call that life? No, that's not life. You throw up a stone, it comes down. Earth attracts it, and the stone too attracts the earth. Is that life? No, that's not life. Just because two pieces of matter take cognizance of each other, that makes neither of them alive. In fact, a disturbing and revealing question, an interesting and useful question would be, was it in those pieces to not take cognizance of each other? Does water have the choice to not to boil at 100 degrees? Do you have the choice to not to be provoked when aroused? Water is raised to 100 degrees, it boils. Normal pressure and water boils. You too are hit with 100 abuses and you boil up. If you are alive, then water too is alive. There's a man sitting here, and next to him is water on a boiler. Water in a boiler or water on a heater, something. There the temperature is rising. And here the number of abuses being hurled on this man is rising. 1 to 1. 65 degrees, 65 abuses. 100 degrees, 100 abuses. 100 degrees there, the water evaporates. 100 abuses here, the man explodes. Water surely is a living thing. So that too is a thing of honesty. And certain wise men have said, all right, you want to consider yourself as alive? Then consider everything in Prakriti as alive. Simply say, Kan Kan mein Narayan. If you are alive, then even this gate is alive. If you are alive, then even this wall is alive. But the fundamental equation remains the same. You and the wall cannot be called as different. Krishna is saying the wall is dead, you too are dead. Others have said, if you are alive, then the wall is alive. Both are saying the same thing. There is no difference between you and the wall. If you can see this deadness, if you can tolerate this hard-hitting equivalence, you come alive. You must learn to see the dead in the living. When you look at the mirror, you must be able to see ashes. When you look at something that appears so enchanting, so mesmerizing, you must be able to see iron ore and manganese and zinc and copper and carbon. When you look into a pair of seductive eyes, you should be able to see carbon and nitrogen and oxygen and a lot of dust. All right, stardust. Nevertheless, just dust. Just dust. Try practicing this. When something extremely, you're besotted with cars. Oh, that model, this model. When you look at a car, see iron ore. But it's not just iron. Somebody's intelligence has gone into it and there's a beautiful design. And look at the electronically operated engine. All right. See pointless desire. That which you call as intellect, is it again not something of Prakriti? It's raining outside and we say, water finds and makes its own way. How does it know? Is that not intelligence? How then is intelligence specific to consciousness? Consciousness is not about being intelligent. Consciousness is something else. And that's why the knowers have made a distinction between these two words, intellect and intelligence. They say all the stuff that you have is simply a product of intellect. There is no intelligence in this. Water too has an intellect, not intelligence. What is the intellect of water? Find your way. Know what to react with, know what to avoid. Water knows all that, no? Is there a way you can force water to mingle with oil? No. The water says no. I know. There's something I should not do. So, the normal displays of intellect are not to be conflated with intelligence. What is intelligence? To know that the intelligent one is not. All else is intellect. In Sankhya Yoga, there are 24 tattvas or elements. And among the top ones is buddhi or mahat. So buddhi is just an element of Prakriti. Just an element of Prakriti. It is counted among the Antahkaran Chatushtaya. Man buddhi chitta ahankar. Adi Shankaracharya immortalized them in his Nirvana Shatkam. They come from Sankhya Yoga. Buddhi or chit, memories, and ahankar, ego, they all come in the purview of Prakriti. Five Gyanendriyas, five Karmendriyas, five Tanmatraएं. Everything that you can feel, sense, and the product of the experience, all that is just Prakriti. Where is life in all this? No life. Wisdom lies in not believing in a false division of Prakriti. We take Prakriti, and Prakriti by itself is just insentient. We take the insentient, divide it into two, and call one of the parts as sentient. And thereby we deprive ourselves of real sentience. If you take Prakriti and pick up one of its parts and start calling it conscious, then you will be deprived of real consciousness of the Purusha. So Sankhya goes to great extremes. It's no coincidence that the very chapter here is Sankhya Yoga. Sankhya goes to great extremes to enumerate. Sankhya itself means enumeration. Sankhya means enumeration. That which can be enumerated is Sankhya. Sankhya goes to great extremes to enumerate what all comes in the purview of Prakriti. And having enumerated, Sankhya says everything. Everything. The seer and the seen both. The experiencer and the object of experience both. Everything is just Prakriti. Everything is just Prakriti. So why are you grieving, Arjun? A leaf has fallen. Dust continues to blow. The grass grows, the wind blows. There is no difference between the grass and the wind. Are you getting?
Namaskar, Acharya ji. Everything is dead and everything are basically molecules that are just in a default arrangement. So, can we say that Prakriti has induced us into a falseness that there are these biological senses and these compulsions that we have of our emotions? So, does observing these emotions and observing these compulsions and avoiding them, is that a first way to move towards being truly alive?
Yes, observe them, but without blaming Prakriti or anybody. Nobody has brought you to this condition. You wanted to exist, therefore you gave yourself a condition. Anything that exists in some condition, right? Huh? So you want to exist, so sometimes you give yourself a good condition, sometimes a bad condition. Just observe.
Yes, is that the entire purpose of life, is to just observe and then not be like just swayed away by it?
The ego does not need an entire purpose of life. It's so much in pain and so full of immediate distress that it's enough for it to pay attention to its immediate surroundings. And the most immediate to the ego is itself. So words like ultimate mean nothing to the ego. The ego is like a patient on ventilator. If you talk about life after 10 years to somebody who is on ventilator, assuming that he is able to talk, it's quite meaningless. That fellow is looking forward to the next 1 hour. Will I see the next day? Will I survive the next hour? That's the ego. So much in distress that even the next 1 hour is difficult to predict or see through or navigate.
It's fascinating how all this relates to evolutionary biology, like so much of it.
You cannot appreciate Sankhya Yoga if you do not appreciate evolution. Entire Sankhya Yoga is evolutionary. But unfortunately, so much of religion has been about creation, not evolution. Religion says man came through a process of creation. And who was the creator? Some god. Now the fact is, in Sankhya Yoga, there is really no place for any god. You call it one of the Astik Darshans. But in reality, in the darshan itself, there is no god. There is no god in Sankhya. And there can be no god in Sankhya because Sankhya is continuously about evolution. If things are evolving, how can there be a creator? If one thing evolves into another thing, show me where is the creator then? When you say creation, you mean there is somebody who just made this thing into what it is. But the fact is that the thing did not become what it is in one go, in one stroke. It has continuously been evolving. So that's the great contribution of Sankhya Yoga. And that's also what Yoga borrows from Sankhya. That's also what Vedanta owes to Sankhya. That's also what Buddhism owes to Sankhya. The thing that entire existence is a flow. Everything is a process. Everything is ever changing. That's Sankhya. And the very common tripartite division of Prakriti into Sat, Raj and Tam. Today we take that as commonplace, but all that comes from Sankhya. So yes, that's the reason why I continuously say evolutionary biology is so important. When I say evolutionary biology is important, actually what I'm saying is Sankhya Yoga is important. But if I just say Sankhya Yoga, this generation might not appreciate that. So I say evolutionary biology.
धन्यवाद आचार्य जी.
So my question revolves around the statement that you said that we all actually don't exist, and even our consciousness is also false. And if I look at Arjun at that moment, then even Arjun is being driven by his bodily tendencies only. So even he is dead, right? So to whom Shri Krishna is teaching at that moment. So what is still alive inside Arjun at that moment, even after being dead inside out?
The dead man walking is the dead man suffering. He needs to be cremated. That's what the instruction is all about. You are already dead. Why do you continue to walk and suffer? Let's put you to rest. Let's cremate you. That's the Bhagavad Gita. The ego is the dead man walking. Dead, still suffering. Rather suffering exactly because it is dead. So that's a delicate thing to appreciate. You are not, yet you insist that you must be. You forcefully insist that you must be, and in that you create yourself. But your creation is needless, therefore you suffer. It's like a car already packed, full of 5 passengers. And those 5 are sufficient. They can deliver the goods. There is a nice network, a perfect equilibrium that those 5 passengers or 5 elements very ably serve. Then a 6th one tries to barge in. He says, I must fit in, I must fit in. I'm needed. Now this 6th one is outside Prakriti. But he forcefully enters the car. What does he do? He creates suffering. He is not needed, he is coming in and he creates suffering. Everything is proceeding very nicely. And then something happens. An unwanted intrusion. That's what the ego is about. A needless thing, and therefore a thing that causes suffering, obviously only to itself. We said today that it's a belief. And I'm fond of often saying the ego is the most fundamental superstition. So it's a thing of the mind. You remember the Abrahamic story about the origin of everything? So there is God and there is Adam. And to give Adam some company, there is Eve. And that's Prakriti. Adam, Eve, and the great garden. Appreciate the symbolism. There is Adam, there is Eve, and there is a great garden, and they are just roaming about happily. And God has instructed them, there is that particular tree, and there is that apple. Do not take that apple. And that's the apple of knowledge. And then this mischievous snake comes and says, there's a special apple that God is probably reserving for himself, and you must have it. So it was needless. Needless knowledge is ego, and it results in suffering. That which you need not know, but in a spell of mischief, you start knowing. That's ego. What is that needless knowledge? Belief. Useless knowledge. Needless knowledge. Just superstition. Something that you should have never believed in. But now you have taken it in. Now you have taken it in and it cannot be just ejected out. So God says, now that the two of you have done this, all right, go to earth and breed kids, and the entire humanity will proceed from there. And these two were really in a state of bliss. Sahajata. Sahajata. Egoless sahajata. These two were in an egoless sahajata. It is said that the moment they ate the apple, they became conscious of the I, which is called self-consciousness. Conscious of the I, self-conscious. So what did they do? They covered their genitals. They became ashamed. Conscious of the I. Because the I sprung up. There was no I. That false belief gave them the I. So they became self-conscious. So they covered their body parts. They covered their body parts. And then God banished them from the garden of bliss. He said, you go now. You go out. You have defiled your own Prakritic purity. You have violated my instruction. There was no need. You go. So, needless. Everything is all right. Everything is already all right. And the ego comes and says, no, something extra is needed. The ego is the fifth person in the car. Somebody extra who is not needed at all. The ego is a kind of overpopulation. Tonight itself I have we can publish a mini book of the number of definitions we have accorded the ego. Yes.
So, sir, what we call as consciousness is also a part of my ego itself?
What you call as consciousness is just material reactivity. When you say you are conscious of something, you are just reacting to that thing. It's like we said, iron being conscious of the magnet. Just as iron experiences the magnet, similarly we experience the world in very, very predictable and pattern-based ways. There is no real wisdom or realization in that. And the test of that is, iron cannot not react to the magnet. Iron cannot not react to the magnet. And that's what is called compulsive reactiveness. Man cannot not react to the abuses. Woman cannot not react to the man. That's a compulsive magnet and iron relationship. There is no real life in that. Spirituality is about bringing life by putting the dead to death.
Okay, thank you so much.
Good evening, sir. So, sir, when we talk about the common consciousness and the way you were explaining it, is that also just the conditioning?
Yeah, that's what. See, material is conditioning. That which is a product of certain conditions is called material. Is there anything in Prakriti that is not a product of its conditions? So what is conditioning? Conditioning is both a process and an output. Everything is conditioned. There is nothing that just shows up. Everything is the result of a process. That's called conditioning.
So when we say that, I mean, there is no difference between life and death in this way, in Prakriti, but can we still say that death is end of the reaction?
Change in reaction, but that change is anyway always happening. You see, an iron piece experiences an attractive force towards a magnet, right? The iron is at a distance of 1 meter from the magnet, right? And the iron piece is drawn towards the magnet, and now it's at a distance of 0.5 meters from the magnet. What happens to the attractive pull?
It grows stronger.
Right. So something has changed. Changed, nothing else. That's not death. That's not nothing else. That's just change. In one condition, you were behaving in one way. Now your condition has changed, so you are behaving in another way.
So if I were to put it very, very, very summarily, can we just say that we are like animals? And
that's a lot of aggrandization. But yes, given that no animal ostensibly has enrolled in this course, we can say that and get away with that. But once, if you see people as people, you'll be very angry at them. If you see people as animals, you'd still have some expectations. But if you can see people as processes, the first thing that you will lose is anger. The fellow is not a fellow. The fellow is a process. How can you get angry at a process? The fellow is not a fellow. The fellow is a mass of chemicals. How can you get angry at hydrogen peroxide? You are calling that fellow by some name. Give me a name. Some fellow you get usually angry at.
Tony.
Tony. Tony is not a person. Tony is a perchloride. So are we all. Ahimsa is not about not getting angry on people. Ahimsa is about seeing the pointlessness of anger. The fact is that the other fellow cannot help doing what he is doing because he is a process. The iron piece cannot help doing what it does. Just as you call animals not as he but as it, start calling people not as he but as it. And then you find that anger becomes untenable. There is no person. There is just iron and magnet and nitric acid and sand. How do you get angry at sand? There is no person. But that is possible only if you first of all start seeing that I am not a person. I remaining a person, I cannot call that one as a process. There is a process here, there is a process there. What is there to get angry about? He did what he could. Therefore, I have been insisting continuously that consciousness, real consciousness, is choice. In a process, there is no choice. The fellow in front of you, how much of choice does he have? If he has no choice, why get angry? And if he has choice, then the mark of having choice is that you will not choose wrongly. And then you will not get a reason to be angry at him. Had he really had choice, he would have chosen rightly. And had he chosen rightly, you would have found no reason to get mad at him. Right? So if you claim that he is choosing wrongly, actually he is not choosing at all. There is nothing called right choice and wrong choice. There is just called the presence, something called the presence, and something called the absence of choice. Presence of choice is the right choice. Absence of choice is the wrong choice. When you find somebody making a wrong choice, please know that the fellow was helpless and choiceless. There was no fellow, there was just a process. Therefore, there was a wrong choice. No process has the capacity to choose something beyond itself. You do not exist. How do I get angry at you? You do not exist. How do I get angry at you? You are a mass without a center. Who do I get angry at? One cannot get angry at an amorphous mass of things. There must be some point to get angry at. You don't have a point. You don't have a center. So what we call as the wrong center is actually no center. There is either a center or just looseness. There is nothing called the wrong center, really.
This also kind of answers my the question that I had. Ego is hell-bent upon identification. It is that's what Arjun is doing. And that's what Krishna is trying to make him acknowledge and recognize. What purpose does it serve for ego?
Okay. Think of someone who's trying to gate crash into a party. What will he tell the doorkeeper? There is somebody inside, I know.
Yeah.
Right? So if you are to enter a party uninvited, you must continuously assert that you know the people inside. You must continuously be seen hands in hands with someone. Otherwise, the bouncer will throw you out. Are you getting? Okay. There is a hotel. You don't really have a room there. You don't really have a room there. Huh? Still you want to enter the hotel. What is it that you must continuously keep telling the hotel staff?
I know one of the guests.
One of the guests. And the fact is, you don't know any of the guests. So what do you keep changing?
The names.
The room number that you quote. And the names that you quote. Do the residents need to make up a story?
No.
But does the intruder need to make up a story?
Yeah.
Always. The ego is the intruder. So the ego always needs somebody's company to roam around. If the ego is found roaming around the resort campus, solo, all by itself, what will happen?
It'll be thrown out.
It will be thrown out. The only way it can survive inside the campus, the resort, the hotel campus, is by being seen in somebody's company. And then, the ego will be respected because it is with someone. The ego will be allowed to exist because it is with someone. So that's the only way the ego can survive, by being
with someone.
With someone. And the ego always says in its own justification that the residents need me, therefore I exist. The fact is, even without the intruder, the residents are
completely adequate.
Completely adequate, at rest, satisfied, balanced, in harmony.
Thank you.
Good evening, sir. Sir, what I understood today about truth is that truth is something which should, which truth is truth when it is useful to us. That's what I understood. And at the same time, from the verse that I understood is that body does not exist, and our consciousness, our ego does not exist. So I was trying to relate this with the truth itself, and there is a usefulness of truth when there is a usefulness of something when there's a truth. And for this verse, if I were to look at it from the usefulness standpoint, from my day-to-day purpose, how could I relate it with? So that's my question. I mean, in my daily activity or my daily affair, if I were to look at this verse and then try to find out certain usefulness, what could they be? And if I were to extract that truth.
Who told you that it has to be useful in terms of augmenting or facilitating your pre-existing daily activities? The usefulness of truth lies in the fact that it destroys your definitions of usefulness. What you are saying is you already have a set of preconceived daily activities and you want to lubricate those activities by using the truth. What kind of... You are trying to feed a mountain to a mice. You are trying to feed a mountain to mice. Truth is, and our daily activities are the mice. So how can the mountain be of use to the mice?
I got it.
Truth is useful not because it supports your daily activities, but because it tells you that your daily activities are coming from a very needless center.
Understood, sir. Another question that I had was on the pain that the body suffers, and all the physical pain when the sword slaughters the body, it does suffer all this pain. And from the verse, it's quite evident that even the body does not exist, but somewhere the ego, at the core of our ego, or we do perceive that pain in reality. So is it just my perception of the ego itself which is causing me to have feel the pain?
The pain too is a thing in Prakriti. Pain is just like sand. It is one of the elements. It is one of the elements in Prakriti. Pain may exist. The ego turns the pain into something personal. That's where the problem is. Otherwise, pain is just like sunlight. Things happen. Pain also happens. When pain starts having a meaning to me, that's called suffering. Pain has no meaning. Pain is like dawn and dusk. Do they have a meaning? No. They are just happenings, routine happenings. Things routinely happen in Prakriti. Pain also happens, pleasure also happens. Ego is the one that tries to derive meaning from or give meaning to pleasure, pain, this, that. You slipped and fell. Right?
Yeah.
And things happen. But look at the kind of meanings that the ego attaches to such events. Who was it who looked at me? Who was it who looked at me? I am great. How can I slip? Who left the banana peel or the oil drops on the floor? How much have I paid him? How much do I punish him? All this is suffering. Was the CCTV camera working when I slipped? How do I delete the recording? This is suffering. I had saved money for an outing. I seem to have broken my hip. Will I have to give all this money to the doctor? This is suffering. What will happen then to my desire for tourism? I had saved 50,000 for my vacation. And this doctor I know, he will squeeze the entire amount out of me. What will happen to my vacation now? Suffering. Ego is the one that starts giving meanings to Prakriti. In Prakriti, there are just things, not even things, just processes, no meanings. Because all meanings are to somebody. In Prakriti, there is a lot that is happening, but nothing that has a meaning. And to the ego, everything has a meaning. And it's a concocted meaning. It's an imaginary meaning. Nothing means anything. Nothing means anything. Realization is to come to the end of all meanings. That's liberation. To be liberated from all meanings. No coincidence that meaning is also called earth. And earth is also a name for desire. All meanings include desire. Therefore, liberation is to come to the end of meaning, which is to come to the end of desire.
Understood, sir. Sir, one last bit on ego. So, what you said today is ego is just a belief.
Ego is just a belief. Yeah.
It's just a belief. And often at times I hear this phrase a lot in my day-to-day life and also in corporate world. A lot of people saying, I believe this, I believe that. So does that mean that all their belief is of no significance because ego itself does not exist at all?
This corporate thing, etc. No. Why must we spoil our mood to even raise it in the context of Bhagavad Gita? Huh?
Sorry, sir. I'm sorry, sir.
No. It's just a statement of a fact. I mean, Yes.
Thank you, sir.